Hello and welcome back to the Sleep Like a Baby podcast. I'm your host Hannah and I'm an infant sleep consultant as well as a mum living and working in South East London. Before we crack on with this week's episode, I had a little bit of housekeeping here to do, and I wanted to let you know that if your child is coming up to starting childcare, maybe that's going to nursery or childminder, or they're going to be cared for by a family member, I've created a webinar that's going to be happening on the 9th of November at 1 p.m. UK time, helping parents sort of transition in that period. So what can you do to prepare them for that change? How can you navigate the change when it's happening? How can you reconnect after you've been apart all day, and what to expect around sleep? And then also lots of practical stuff about, for example, what happens if your baby or toddler doesn't nap at all at nursery, or maybe they're taking really epic long naps at nursery, and their daily rhythm is changing, and how we can support sleep and figure all of that out. Plus, often with childcare comes arrival of lots of bugs and illnesses, so there's some troubleshooting there. Anyway, it's all on my website and I'll do a link in the show notes. But on to this week's episode. It was honestly one of the most joyful, funny episodes I've recorded in a really long time. And in fact, it took me quite a long time to edit because I was just laughing a lot. So I had to kind of cut out a lot of my own laughter over what my guest was saying because, I'm a big fan of Kathryn Stagg anyway. If you're not aware of her, she's a lactation consultant, and she is a mother of 4, and her first 2 babies were identical twins. So I really wanted to talk about parenting responsively and feeding responsively when you have multiples. But I think even if you have a singleton baby or several singletons, I still think there's so much you can get out of this episode, because I think Kathryn's attitude is just so wonderful. Her just sense of humor and positivity is really inspiring, but she's also so real. She does not sugarcoat anything. She's not pretending everything's hunky-dory. It's just a very real, raw, honest conversation about how hard it can be, and how if we don't laugh, sometimes we will cry. Sometimes it's okay to cry, but it feels good to laugh about it too. So thank you so much to Kathryn for giving me this real gem of an interview with lots of very practical tips about, for example, how you can co-sleep with multiple children, whether you should wake them to feed, etc., how to get a kind of a bit of a routine going with your twins, but also just lots of talk about mindset and what's normal, and understanding that this right now is a season. So without any further ado, here's the interview. The Sleep Like a Baby podcast is supported by The Octopus Club, the online marketplace where you can buy, sell and give away baby and kid stuff without any hassle. If your home is piling up with toys, clothes and bits of kit that your little one no longer uses, The Octopus Club offers an easy, environmentally friendly way of selling or donating things to other families. And if you're on the hunt for high quality second-hand goods, this is the place for you. Honestly, the stuff on there is gorgeous. Check them out on Instagram or go straight to their website, theoctopusclub.com, to sign up today. So thank you so much, Kathryn. How are you? How are you doing?
I'm okay. Slightly. I'm always tired. It's just life, isn't it? But but apart from that, fine, completely normal.
I saw you posted on Instagram recently this year about your 5-year anniversary of sleeping
Yes.
through the night. I thought it was really funny. So you're a mum of 4.
Yep.
So you must be just permanently knackered.
It's just chaos. It's total chaos, basically. Yeah.
And what's the age range in all of your children?
So I'm quite old now. So my eldest are I've got twins who are 17, and then a 12-year-old and an 8-year-old.
Wow.
Now. So yes.
That's a lot of different stages of life.
Yes.
Yeah. And so for people that may not have come across you before, you are an IBCLC, which is the highest level of being a lactation consultant, essentially. And how long have you been working in the world of breastfeeding? And
as an IBCLC, I've been 5 years. I'm just doing my 5-year recertification, which has been accepted. Yay! Which we have to do lots of continuing education and prove it, and all this sort of stuff. And so that's all done. So it was a bit stressful, but it's okay. But I've been doing breastfeeding support for absolute age. I basically trained as a breastfeeding peer supporter, which is the sort of mums who want to help a bit type level. When my twins were 1, so that's 16 years ago, and then volunteered, locally all around the in all the different breastfeeding groups and such like that we've had here in Harrow in northwest London, which is where I am, and I just sort of really got a lot out of it, and so do the parents, obviously. But it's like, for me as well, I'm absolutely addicted to the oxytocin that you get from supporting people. I think that's why I've worked out what it is over the years. So it's just you also get a lovely surge of oxytocin when you leave a mum and they're just happily latched baby on, pain-free for the first time ever. You're just like, oh, it's just so lovely. So I thought, actually, this is a really nice thing to do, and I was really kind of interested and starting to get quite fascinated in the subject. So basically did my breastfeeding counsellor training a few years later with the Association of Breastfeeding Mothers. So this is to kind of volunteer on the National Breastfeeding Helpline. So I don't do that enough nowadays, but I used to do it quite a lot. Still do occasionally. And but yeah, sort of started to improve my knowledge. And then it was such a minefield, because lactation consultant training it's a total like confusion. Nobody knows what to do with it at all. So for a long time, I didn't think I was able to train as a lactation consultant because I'm not a healthcare professional. And it is much easier if you're a healthcare professional, but it is possible if you're not. So it does. So you just have to do lots of extra courses, and it's just working out what that's the hard bit.
I'd love to go back then to 17 years ago, and you're pregnant with twins. And not to make you feel really old, but 17 years, like lots changed, don't they, in that time period? And also I think our attitudes around things like sleep and feeding are always changing and evolving within our culture. So first of all, what was that experience like, finding out you were having twins?
Well, firstly, the whole pregnancy was slightly not planned in the first place, so that was a bit of a shock to start with. I was quite ready in my head. I was sort of, it was starting to cross my mind that maybe this is something that we should do soon, So I was sort of fairly ready to be a mum, I think. So I was 28 when I had them. So I was, as today's standards, that's fairly young, but not really young. It wasn't too bad. So you can add up now and work out how old I am. But yeah. So, just about to turn 29 when they came out. But so the whole thing was, so we kind of just about got our heads around the fact that we were actually pregnant when I had my scan at 11 weeks, which is a little bit early, because I have a funny feeling my midwife may have had a hunch. She's a very experienced midwife, who's a lovely lady, honestly. I actually know her quite well now, because I've at the time, obviously, I'd only just met her, but fantastic. So I think she might have sent me for a scan a little bit early, because she was thinking, she's a little bit large. Possibly. I think I was already showing a little bit, when I saw her. So yes, and there they were, and the sonographer went, do you see what I see? And me and my partner went sort of, is there 2? And she went, yeah. And I was like, oh, and basically swore a lot then. I was like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God.
Honestly, when we had our scan with my son, the first thing my husband said was just like, how many? That was all. Not even are they, just how many, because his best friend had twins a couple of years before. So.
Yes, anyone who's had a best friend who's had twins, that would be the first question. That's what all my friends said as well afterwards.
How many?
Yeah, so it took us a little while to get our head around that as well. My husband actually went and basically sat down the bottom of the garden for the next week, really, and didn't really talk very much. But he sort of processed the whole thing. So I was so sick as well, and it was I think it's because of twin hormones. I mean, I was on the verge of HG, really. I wasn't quite unwell enough to be in hospital and things, but it was very touch and go. I have to say, it was just horrendous trying to work, and it's just awful. So yeah, it was quite challenging. So I really just had to get my head down and try and kind of cope, really, and not think about it too much, and then eventually stopped throwing up around 20 weeks. So,
God.
and then I started to think about, this is actually, 20 weeks scan was all fine, everything was happening well. So I started to then realize that this was actually going to happen. It was a reality. And yeah, I've always been a bit of a kind of reader of stuff. So I started kind of reading up on things, and I thought to myself, I'd like to breastfeed, but I've got 2 babies. I'm not going to put myself under pressure. I'll give myself a bit of a, try, see how I get on, kind of thing. And what was interesting is when I ended up, a lot of twin pregnancies are induced. So they don't like you to go really full. They say full term is 37 weeks for twin pregnancy. In reality, mine certainly didn't want to come out. So because they didn't have a bed, I didn't actually get induced for a little while longer. So they were 38 and something. Well, they were doing okay as well. They left me another week anyway, and they didn't have a bed. So it took several more days for me to actually get induced. So it didn't work, which induction, sometimes doesn't work. It's a very, it's an artificial process. And ended up with an emergency cesarean, but they both latched straight away.
Okay.
And because they did that, I went, oh my God, I now have to do this, because it would be me not doing it rather than I'd be able to blame the babies. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They fed really well, so I was really lucky from that point of view. So yeah, so I mean, we combi fed a little bit in the first week or two. Mainly, it wasn't actually that they needed it. Looking back now, there was no way that they needed to be combi fed. But I think it was just the adjustment of actually becoming a mum and the intensity of having 2 new babies, which you can imagine it's intense having one, isn't it? If you're having 2 as well. But yeah, I just found that it was something that became really important, and it was something that I never really imagined would have done, so it was, and look what happens. It's just bizarre. What would my life have been like had I decided, or had they not latched? I don't know.
Yeah, life path. Yeah.
So yeah, it's really, really bizarre. So yeah, eventually after about sort of 2-3 weeks, managed to get rid of the formula, because I just found it was harder work actually. Once the pain had gone, it was a little bit uncomfortable to begin with, because I wasn't very good at latching them, like not the first time mums. But once we kind of got over that after the first 2-3 weeks or so, and yeah, I actually really enjoyed breastfeeding them. And so it was a bit of a slog. It was hard work, but it was still better than standing in a cold kitchen waiting for the milk to be the right temperature with screaming babies, which is the reason why I stopped using formula. That's the main reason.
There's no easy way to feed a baby, is there? Like,
no, exactly. I just had this, I remember this very clearly, because most of the first few weeks is quite foggy. I can't really remember very much about it, but there's Mother Nature protecting me so that I had more children, I think. But but I can remember very clearly this one night. It was about 2 a.m. and I was just, I can't do this anymore. Let's go and get a bottle. So me and my husband were standing in the kitchen. Babies were going, wah! They just wanted to go back to sleep. We'd sort of prepared feeds. They weren't, trying to cool them down, kind of trying to get them working a bit better. And I just had this sudden revelation. If I breastfed them, they would have been asleep again by now, and so would I. This is really stupid. Give me the baby. I'm going to go back to bed. The breast, and that was the last. That was the last time we considered using it. So, yeah, so I had a bit of a wobble around 4 months as well, because it got quite, night waking, as we know, gets a little bit interesting around 4 months.
Yeah.
So I had another bit of a wobble around then as to whether it was something that I should be doing. But so yeah, in general, I'm so glad I stuck that one out, because actually the last sort of 6 to 12 month bit was breastfeeding was really lovely. It was my favorite bit actually. So, so just to take the pressure off a little bit by having solids as well. But it's just you just have all the nice bits of breastfeeding by then. It's good.
Yeah.
And the easy bits.
The easy bits. Yeah. That's such an amazing story. And did people did you get a lot of support, or did people, like, when you said you were having a hard time, what was the sort of response that you got?
I had a couple of quite sort of 2 or 3, no, probably more than that, 3 or 4 key points of contact, I'd say, from various different people, which kind of changed me a little bit. You know what I mean? So the first one was on day 2 in hospital, where I very luckily had a midwife who had also breastfed her own twins, and she went, right, I'm going to get you tandem feeding on day 2. So she came and latched them both on, showed me how to do it, all this kind of stuff. And so of course that was a bit revolutionary, because I then meant I could feed both of them at the same time, which was which was rather good. So that was that. And then the same midwife who had, suspected that I had twins was also quite good at breastfeeding support, and she was very encouraging. And she also dropped in this, there's a new breastfeeding cafe opening, down the road at the end of next week. Babies would be about 3 weeks old by this point. If you go along, they're probably going to have the local newspaper taking photos. They'd love your photo in the newspaper. I'm sure she said that to try and get me to go. So I thought, that would be quite cool. I might do that, and then on the day it was sort of, actually, you know what I mean? We're okay. And it was walking distance. So went out for a walk and sort of went and found this breastfeeding cafe that was just opening. So that was quite a big change as well, because then I knew where to go. So I basically went pretty much every week. I think it was a social one as well as being a kind of problem fixing one as well. So literally, I just went there really every week, even though I didn't really have any problems, just because people went, "Oh my God, you're amazing! You're feeding 2," and every week that kept me going for another week, which was lovely. So yeah, so that was sort of checked in there every week, and then I found my local twins club as well, and that was another and again, the lady that ran that had breastfed hers, so again, quite lucky from that point of view. So, and also a lovely friend of mine, which became a friend of mine, who had triplets, and she was breastfeeding her triplets exclusively. And I thought, well, I can't stop because I've only got 2 babies. She's got 3. I mean, that's ridiculous. How can I stop if she's doing 3? So so we kept each other going, because she was sort of felt a bit the same with me as well. You know what I mean? Well, she's managing to do it. Well, I should be able to. She had an extra baby, but yeah, that was lovely. So we kept each other going a bit. So yeah, there were a few kind of things. My mum was around for the first few 2-3 weeks, which was lovely. So yeah, it's just you just have to have having 3 adults around when you have twins is a really good plan.
Yeah,
if you can manage it.
Support, as you know, it really is everything when it comes to goals, isn't it? However, and I think, I suppose, I'm someone that really struggled to breastfeed one baby, and I don't. So and I know a big part of I think the whole part of that actually was the lack of practical support that I had, and certain healthcare professionals several who repeatedly told me to stop.
Yeah.
And that really undermined my confidence.
Of course it would. Yeah, absolutely.
So I wanted to offer that in case anyone's listening and feeling like, oh God, like I didn't, because I didn't have that experience, because it just shows like you had some amazing people. It sounds like just some amazing people in your corner and making you feel like you could do it. And that's so wonderful. I'm really happy for you that you got that was your experience.
And that's what you need. Exactly. And that's basically why I trained as a peer supporter, because then over the course of the next few months, whilst I was going to baby groups and, other people came through into Twins Club and things like that as well. And I realized I started hearing the stories. Yeah. And I thought to myself, that is so unfair. It was pure luck that I got the support that I did. It wasn't anything. I didn't pay for it. I didn't book it. I didn't look for it particularly. You know what I mean? It just happened to be, we had good breastfeeding support in my area, happened to have a really good midwife who knew what she was doing, which is, luck of the draw quite often, you know what I mean? And I was like, this is totally wrong. Absolutely wrong. And I've basically been fueled by that rage from then and still this is why I still do it. So the fact it is so unfair that so many people, it's not a feeding choice, breastfeeding, for a lot of people, and that's the thing that really makes me cross. Is that it's always marketed as a feeding choice. You can either decide to breastfeed, or you can decide to formula feed, or you can combination feed, or they don't even talk about combination feeding particularly, but it's marketed as a choice. But the problem is those that choose to breastfeed then don't get the support to do it, and so their choice is taken away totally, and that's really makes me cross. So, especially as so many things that if you can, like the last couple of home visits I've done have actually been quite lovely, straightforward ones, which is nice. As a lactation is on, I usually get quite complicated stuff, as you can imagine, but the last couple I've done have been quite straightforward, and literally we've moved the baby about 2 millimeters and suddenly the feed's pain free, and you're like, there you go. That's all it took. You know what I mean? It's really small things sometimes, and if you catch it early enough, then it stops it building up into that that more problematic thing that's harder to fix, so one of the take-home messages I always say for anybody who is expecting a baby, find your breastfeeding support before the baby arrives, so you know where to look when you're in the fog and your brain isn't working properly. And then don't be afraid to ask for help, because if you can catch stuff early, you're much more likely to be able to sort it out easily, and then have hopefully a lovely straightforward breastfeeding journey from then onwards. But that's the main thing, really.
Yeah, definitely, that's the best advice, and I would say the same thing. Yeah. And okay, so did you have any expectations about how your twins would sleep then?
Oh, I had all the usual very unrealistic ones, that my babies wouldn't be those ones. Slept.
What is it about human nature? We just, it's so funny, isn't it? You hear like horror stories. This is me when I was pregnant. I thought, well, but thankfully I'm just not going to get one of them, or how unlucky for them. But I'm sure mine won't do that. And then
I was actually at the time it didn't feel like it, but I was actually quite lucky with my twins in the fact that they were fairly naturally good sleepers, I have to say. They didn't sleep through for quite a while, but babies aren't supposed to, as we say. But in my head, I thought that I was failing terribly, because they were still waking quite a lot at 7 months, that kind of stuff. You assume that they're supposed to be sleeping by then, because that's what everyone tells you. But actually, by the time they were about sort of 10, 11 months, they were sleeping pretty well, which is quite good, really. And I think part of it was, firstly, they had to they had each other. I think that was one of the main things for the twins, is that they weren't ever left alone, which I do think had a bit of a beneficial tendency, I suppose, let's say. And it also made it a little bit easier on my point of view, in the fact that I didn't feel like I was abandoning them completely. Which, in fact, I just needed a rest. It was that kind of thing. So they did sort of settle fairly easily. I didn't get a huge amount of sleep the first few months, as you can imagine. Very little, to be honest. But it's amazing what you can survive on, isn't it? Yeah, with them it was. But I thought when they did start sleeping quite well, about 10 months, I assumed it was because I was an awesome parent and that I'd done all the right things. And then I had another baby who didn't sleep anyway. And then I had another one who really didn't sleep anywhere near us. And despite being sort of parented in fairly similar ways, obviously twins to singletons is slightly different, but it was obvious that actually it was nothing to do with how I parented whatsoever.
I know, that is a crushing realization, isn't it?
Yeah.
I feel like parenting is just the most humbling experience.
Absolutely.
Isn't it? Just constantly being humbled and taught hard lessons. Okay, so did people though, like, did you feel that, especially as someone who is breastfeeding twins, because I think there are a lot of misconceptions out there about breastfeeding and sleep, as you know all too well. Did you like, you mentioned that sort of 4-month mark, and that's when people start to say, like, well, then just top them up with a bottle and they'll sleep through. What are your thoughts on that whole misconception that's out there?
It's really, really, when you're in the thick of it with no sleep, it's just you'd do anything, wouldn't you, to actually get a couple of hours in a row, basically. And that's how I was feeling at the time, is that so I did try giving a bottle, not at night particularly at that point, but sort of I was starting to think that maybe I'd done enough sort of exclusive breastfeeding, and maybe I should start combination feeding to make my life easier. But what was interesting is one of my twins then actually, thankfully, looking back on it now, refused. So he was like, I'm not having a bottle anymore. No. And it was so stressful to try and take him, and I thought, actually breastfeeding is all right, I can keep going, it's fine. So I just thought, what, sod this, I'll just feed him and carry on for a bit and see how he get on. And I said I'm so relieved that happened, because actually it was really lovely after that. The next bit was actually not quite as intense and not quite as difficult. So but yes, so for me it was, I knew that night waking was quite normal, but then you do read all the kind of sleep training stuff, don't you? And sort of, there's a lot of pressure to do that. With twins, they kind of have to be, they do have to learn to wait a little bit with twins. It's difficult because you can't be totally as responsive as you want to be. It's just impossible, and it's very, very difficult from that point of view. That's one of the hardest things, really. It's just, you feel like you're being split in two the entire time. You get incredibly fast at nappy changes, and you get so I was trying to find ways of making my life as easy as possible. So for me, tandem feeding before they went to sleep, and then there's the other ultimate question always of having twins is, do you wake the second baby at night? That's the ultimate dilemma, because of course, especially for those who prefer to tandem feed, it's much quicker to feed both at the same time and get them back to sleep again than it is if to feed one and then the other one wakes up half an hour later just after you've gone back to sleep, which is just but then there's also that tendency, some twins are individuals, and one of them may sleep naturally longer than the other, and actually if you leave them, sometimes they feed better when they wake up, and you know what I mean. So it's just this ultimate kind of dilemma. So I can remember going through that a bit around this kind of 4 or 5 month age, once they had a period of real frequent waking, and then once it had passed a little bit, probably more like 5 to 6 months then, I expect, just thinking to myself, what do I do? Do I wait a second one or not? And it's just, and we tried it sometimes and not others, and it was just, it was a bit all over the place. So yeah, it was slightly challenging from that point of view. But we did get to a stage where they became sort of fairly, they had their sort of sleep cycles. I think mine are identical, which probably helps a little bit, because I think they have more similar sleep needs and such like. So I think that does help a little bit with those that have got non-identical twins. You can, the genetic side of everything can be completely different from one baby to the next. I think a lot of, I did a survey. I run a Facebook group called Breastfeeding Twins Strippers UK, which has about 8,000 members now. And I did a little survey in there, and so we're going to go into orchids and dandelions in a minute, aren't we? But I did a little survey about whether they thought that their twins were equally as, either both sort of on the easier side of sleep, or one of each, where one was easy and one was much more difficult, or whether they had two really difficult ones. Thankfully, there were a few that I felt very sorry for the ones that takes the two difficult ones. So there were a few of those, but actually the majority had one of each, which is very interesting. And then there were a few lucky ones who had two easy babies.
That's my experience of working with twin families. I've like, there seems to always be the sensitive twin, like, and I was like, maybe this is a thing.
Yes, yeah. I think it is. And even my identical ones, one of them was far more sensitive than the other. One of them really shouldn't have been a twin. Yeah. Honestly, he was the worst twin that you could. He shouldn't have been one. I said that all the way through the first year. This one really shouldn't have been a twin. He just needs me all the time. The other one was luckily totally laid back and was quite happy just to sit and watch what was going on, and lie on the floor or in his bouncer or whatever. He was absolutely fine. So that did help, which is useful. But then you get that, am I neglecting the other twin thing? You know what I mean? We get so many posts like that on the Facebook group going, I just feel like I'm never cuddling the other one because the high needs one always wants me all the time. So it's a total struggle.
It's a huge thing, isn't it? I think I think for all parents anyway, but particularly when you've got multiple children. And I think that is that must be incredibly intense if you've got two children the exact same age, or three children, and I feel very grateful, although it's a bit selfish, but in my antenatal group we had a set of twins. So incredibly hard work for her, but really put a lot of stuff in perspective for the rest of us. And we also got to see how different babies could be with the same life experience.
Exactly.
And constantly be reminding us, one is doing this now, and one is rolling and the other is nowhere near, like he's just lying there looking happy. All of that stuff was very reassuring. But she did talk a lot about that guilt and that, or just that feeling of being split in two. And do you have any advice for twin mums feeling that right now?
Just basically that there's you just have to go with it. There's nothing you can do. You're only doing your best. That's all you can do at the end of the day. So, and also the main thing is, being a responsive parent is being responsive to your baby's needs. Mm. So if your baby doesn't need you, that is okay. Yeah. So that's the thing. So it's okay if your child is one of those babies who really doesn't need to be picked up all the time and is quite happy, sitting looking around in their bouncer. Basically, that's okay. You can do that. That's fine, and you can concentrate on the one who needs you. I always found as well that if the more chilled out one generally was like unwell or something like that, they seem to have this sixth sense actually. And my slightly more high needs child was actually more chilled out whilst I dealt with the other one, and then as soon as he felt better, or whatever it was that was causing it, teething, all sorts of stuff as soon as he felt better, he would then switch back into his normal self. But they did seem to have this where they sort of, they'd sense that actually mummy really does need to see the other one now a little bit more than normal for whatever reason. So they did switch a little bit, but yeah, they're really I think remembering that the babies are individual, and I said even identical twins are very individual, totally different personality types immediately they were born, honestly, from the second they came out. So remembering that they're not the same, even identical ones, responding and just trying to be in the moment and not over analyzing, and trying not to compare your own babies as well. And it's always difficult, even when you're singleton mum, isn't it? Is comparing against all your friends about what they're doing and whether my baby's not doing that yet. What's this is something to worry about, kind of stuff. But when you have two who are also in the same age but also totally different as your friend's one, actually that can be quite worrying.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
but
I hadn't thought of it like
it's
that.
usually that both babies are normal, but at sort of opposite ends of the scale of normal. That's kind of how it works often. So it's but yeah, and they will do everything eventually, obviously, and some will walk quicker, some will talk quicker. They all that kind of stuff. So it's really just a matter of kind of going with it. And as soon as I relaxed, which took me quite a few weeks, I have to say I was trying to kind of control everything to begin with, as I think many first-time mums do, especially. And then I can remember having the other early conversation I remember with my husband. We're going, you know what? If I just feed them, it's much easier. So I had this revelation. They didn't need to feed every 3 hours. Actually, it was all right if they fed earlier than that. It was okay. It was fine. So, and that actually made life a lot less stressful when I did that. So, and yeah, at that point, and I also bought the book Brazelton's Touch Points. I don't know where we got it from. It's just seemed to appear on my bookcase. I don't know what happened, whether I bought it or my husband bought it or something like that. He's always been quite interested in sort of psychology and things like that, so I think it might have been him actually. So I started kind of just dipping into that and realizing that all their behaviors were caused by something, usually developmental. And actually, from that point of view, that really helped me, because I knew it wasn't anything I was doing wrong. I think that's one of the main things. Is actually most of the because actually most of the challenges that you get when babies are maybe not sleeping or something like that are nothing that you've done, are they? They're all because they're learning loads of new stuff, or their sleep patterns have changed developmentally. They're kind of doing new things, all that kind of stuff. And when I actually understood that, it made it a lot easier to deal with, even though it's still hard. I just knew that there was a cause. They weren't just doing it to annoy me or to try and manipulate me, like people tell you that they're supposed to. But there actually was a reason behind it. And that, so I think learning a bit about how babies sort of work and their development actually really helped as well. So
yeah, definitely. And did you feel then a pressure to get them onto a routine?
Yeah, and everything you read about having twins is that you have to have a routine to cope. That's what everything is. Even Twins Trust, one of the first things you're expecting some of the tips, get them into a routine, it says straight away. So there's routines and routines, of course.
Yeah.
So I was in the fact that I preferred to tandem feed, so I did tend to wake the second baby, especially in the daytime, so they would feed together, which then had a knock-on effect to them sometimes having a nap at the same time, which was slightly life-changing. If you can get them to sleep at the same time in the daytime, it means you can either sleep yourself, which was what I tended to do in the mornings, or actually get in the shower, which is quite challenging when you have two babies, or whatever, you know what I mean? So for me, I did tend to do that, and certainly for the first half of the day, and then it usually went out the window slightly by the end of it. But so that's a sort of routine, it's kind of a routine. A routine is a pattern of behavior, isn't it? But the scheduling side of things was where it got stressful and where it didn't work so well, and I'm not really a scheduling type person generally anyway. So once I kind of let go of that, they should be feeding every 3 hours and napping this. I remember opening a certain book that many of us don't like very much and reading about the kind of, you should put your child down drowsy but awake, it says, doesn't it? And I went, shut the book and put it back on the shelf. So I don't know what gave me the actual confidence to know that was rubbish, because a lot of people get very stressed by that, don't they?
Yeah.
And think that their baby's not doing what they should be doing because they don't do that.
Yeah.
But for some reason, I knew that actually that was okay, and put it back and didn't read it, which I think was far healthier.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I have to say, I think a lot of people believe that if they've got two babies, they're going to have to self-settle. They're going to, you know, and I understand that, you know, especially, well, you're a mum of four, so you get it. Like, you know, you've got your hands full and it's difficult. But particularly in those early stages with twins, what would you say to anyone who feels like that is feeling that drowsy but awake anxiety right now?
I think it's to use feeding as much as possible as whenever it works, but you do get stuck in the feeding cushion. That's the hardest bit. If you're tandem feeding, especially, you get stuck in the feeding cushion because they sleep much better when they're next to you, as we all know. You know, so if you move them off the feeding cushion and put them down, they tend to wake up. So for me, because I had my twins first, it was okay because I literally just, you know, have one on each, feet up, telly on,
Yeah.
and I used to only put them down if I needed a wee. That's basically. You know what I mean? So I really, really need a wee. I'm just gonna put you down, and I thought they're going to wake up and give me 2 minutes to just go for a wee. So I was quite happy, you know, sitting there with the telly on. And then the other thing, I would make sure I went out every day and did a buggy nap, and I think that made a massive difference to me as well. So that there were at least one good nap a day where it wasn't on me and I wasn't feeling touched. For those with toddlers and things like that, on top of having twins, that's a little more challenging. So I think actually using the buggy and, you know, being out with your toddler, going to groups, things like that as well, you know, actually, although it might seem really, really overwhelming, it actually helps because firstly, your toddler is entertained by something. That's really important because toddlers are hard work. Secondly, you go somewhere and you've got two cute babies that all the mum goes, oh, can I have a cuddle? So you actually have a whole morning where you don't have to cuddle your own baby. Someone else will do it for you. And then I just hand them back when they need feeding, which is actually okay. So that's really nice. And you can actually have a hot cup of tea, which just doesn't happen very often. So yeah, if you can sort of find a nice friendly environment that you can go and do that in, you know what I mean? If it's somewhere where you've been going since your baby was little and that's the best sort of place, you know, and some of the like the church toddler groups and things like that are quite good from that point of view. And you always have a lovely old lady running them, making the tea, who likes to cuddle babies as well. So there's always one of the, if you can have someone you can offload one baby to, that's usually quite good. And everybody loves cuddling a new baby, so they don't mind at all. It's lovely. So I think, you know, that's one of the things that can help a lot. So yeah, trying to get out of the house every day, even if it's just for a walk around the block, makes a big difference. You know, so I used to go and, you know, basically if it's raining, I'd put my hood up, or I'd go. Thankfully we live walking distance to towns. I used to just walk into town and go around the shopping centre and window shop with the babies if it was raining, or I'd go around the park if it wasn't, or whatever. So, but yeah, that made a big difference. So using motion also, and actually, if you're struggling to settle your baby with feeding, especially if you're trying to settle them at the same time, and you are getting stuck in the feeding cushion and you can't get out and you need to, then actually doing the motion naps actually works much better, you know what I mean? And you can actually keep them slightly more in sync sometimes, because if you tend to go out for a buggy walk at the same time every day, roughly, your babies are quite like to sleep at the same time, you know, so that works. That's one of the big tips really, is to use what works. They don't have to have cot naps. In fact, cot naps are quite stressful, I think, generally.
Yeah, they can be incredibly stressful, and sometimes, you know, you can end up getting caught, like really nap trapped, because then
you can't go out.
But you know, they're all different, aren't they? And
yeah.
I think the key anyway, and I'm someone who's really prone to catastrophizing, especially when I'm tired and feeling overwhelmed. So I think it just helps to remind yourself, doesn't it, that this isn't forever. Like they need less sleep as they get older. They just, you know,
they'll sleep more bigger chunks as they get older. Less sleep, but longer.
Yeah. Then sometimes I think when you've got a young baby, 2 months away, so that can feel like a really long time, can't it? And you do look at the difference between like a 4-month-old and a 6-month-old, and sometimes you think like they're like teenagers, those 6-month-olds. But no, the naps will drop. Your day won't always be revolving around so many naps with 2 babies, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. I think the other thing though is a lot of twin parents really do value those naps, because it means that you've got a bit of time so you don't have to be touched by somebody. You can actually, you know, but we're so under pressure again to then run around and do all the housework, aren't you, in those nap time, you know what I mean? And actually really what you should be doing is sitting and actually resting or sleeping or whatever yourself, really, if we can. But it's really difficult not to fall into that trap of having to do all the stuff and your baby's nap where you're running around, in case they wake up in 5 minutes, I've got 5 minutes to do the dishwasher. You know, so I'm always a big advocate of trying to do any chores that you've got to do with the babies awake, actually, because they're quite often quite happy to sit and watch the washing machine go round, or make, help you. Especially as they get older, they get quite helpful when they're older. So, but trying to do those sort of chores, having a sling and things like that could be really useful.
Yeah, there are some very clever slings out there, aren't there, for twins?
There are some good twin ones which didn't exist when mine were little, and God, I wish they had done.
I bet. Did you have a lot of like friends, I guess, or people having babies at the same time as you then that were on a similar mindset? Like you found that book and put it away. And funnily enough, I don't know if it's the same book, but a certain like woman who was very popular, I suppose, around 17 years ago, and was very big on strict routines and no eye contact.
Very likely that one.
Yeah. One of my friends who had twins gave me like a set of her books because she was like, you won't survive without this, very well intentioned, but yeah, I don't know. So I suppose, like, did you feel like you were the one doing it differently, or did you actually feel like quite a lot of other people were sort of going with the flow and figuring it out?
It was a tricky one because firstly I was the first one out of my set of friends to have babies, and then I had two at once, which is a bit weird. But once I'd kind of got my little group of mum friends going, I think I found my through being at the breastfeeding group, even though they were mainly singleton mums, I sort of found, and the lady that ran group, who's called Alison Sparrow, who's an amazing lady, completely turned breastfeeding sport around in Harrow single-handedly. She was a health visitor, and she basically designed her role and then got them to fund her, which I always think is quite impressive. So she became a breastfeeding specialist health visitor, she called herself. She does, and she basically wrote her role and then said, pay me to do this. So they did. I was like, how do you manage to do that? Anyway, so but yeah, she was amazing. So she was very much to try and kind of go with the flow, and that the babies need this, that, and the other, and they're not manipulating you, and they're not. So she was a very useful influence, and then the mums that I was around were kind of, again, in that sort of mindset, I suppose, because they, the breastfeeding groups at those times was very much, you'd see this, the same people every week, and then have the odd new person come in every so often, so it was quite a social thing as well as being for breastfeeding support. So I think that helped a lot. But I really didn't really kind of the twins club, again, the lady that ran it, her twins were babies 4 and 5, so she had a very different mindset to me as a first-time mum. So she was very laid back, just like, it'll all be fine, just go with it, it's absolutely fine. You know what I mean? Because by the time you're on babies 4 and 5, you've given up trying to have any sort of routine. So I very much kind of warmed to her, because I'm a slightly chaotic person by nature, generally. So it's for me that validated my, if Tracy can do it with 3 older children, I'm sure it's fun. But I think I don't know where the actual self-belief came from to reject all these ideas. I don't really know what happened there. My mum, actually, I think my mum was quite a good influence. She was quite a responsive parent in an era where that really wasn't a thing. So back in the 70s.
I think that does make a difference, doesn't it? I was wondering as well, I guess, social media didn't really exist, obviously not like it did today.
Didn't exist at all, I can assure you.
Yeah, and that's it. And you are now working every day with brand new families, and of course you have an 8-year-old as well, so you're not that long out of baby stage either, even, but how do you see, what do you see today with the families you work with their brand new babies and their attitudes towards feeding?
I think there has been a bit of a sea change sort of in the last probably 5 years or so, maybe 10, where it has become, the sort of responsive parenting and the less around schedules, things like that, does seem to be getting a little bit more popular. Is that the way to put it? You know what I mean? It's sort of more accepted, let's say, that babies, I mean, there are still those that will advocate sleep training and advocate strict routines and things like that, and they're usually the ones that have the chilled out babies who will fit into a lovely routine that you've bought off the shelf. and they just go with the flow. And there are a certain percentage of the population which will do that. I think it's about 15, isn't it, or something? The research says something like that.
Yeah.
You know, if you got one of those 15% and then it works for you, then you're going to tell everybody how to do it. And this is the thing, but it doesn't work for everybody. So I think that's the so it is becoming a bit more. But I'm still getting DMs every single day on my Instagram going, "Oh my God, your Instagram's so great. It just makes me feel like I'm not doing everything wrong." And you're just like, where do they get this from? You know, that they're doing everything wrong. I think it's just that, you know, I don't know. so following the right accounts is important on social media.
Obviously there's a lot of stuff making. I don't know where I got the whole idea that I was doing everything wrong myself, because actually even my son's like 3.5 now, and even then I don't think Instagram or lots, you know, wasn't quite as,
no,
even then it was quite different. But anyway, I think it's,
I think you're probably just I think as a mum we just think we're doing everything wrong because we blame ourselves for everything, and so it's just naturally what you think is it must be something I'm doing. So when you actually start the realization that it isn't anything you're doing, and that actually this is it's the baby's fault. That's what I always say to people. They're doing this because they can't cope with life at the moment. You know what I mean? It's them. It's them. They need your support. They need your, you know. And when you reframe it in that way, that it's actually, I had this lovely video calling right in the middle of lockdown. The mum had given birth just as we were going into lockdown. You know, March 2020, and she. Probably February 2020. I think she was just before lockdown, and she kind of got breastfeeding going. It was working, but then straight into lockdown. And she had a video call with me about 4 months, and she was in absolute floods of tears. She started combination feeding, and she didn't want to. She'd stopped because of all sorts of things. She was like, the baby, it was single baby won't feed for more than 2 minutes. I'm not making enough milk. I'm not kind of doing this. The baby won't sleep. The baby won't do this. You know what I mean? I've just messed this baby up. I've completely broken them. And the first thing I said was, but this is what babies of this age do. And she was like, what? I said, yeah. And so then I listed, you know, all the stuff that 4-month babies are renowned for, i.e. short naps, not being able to concentrate on anything for more than 2 seconds, really short feeds, because again, they have a little bit and then they're like, oh, there's something else, you know, they're so distractible, all that kind of stuff. And she was just, and then she was like, oh my God. Do you mean I haven't? And she was, you know what I mean? She had no idea that everything that she was experiencing was completely normal. And she was like, so I didn't need to introduce the bottle. I was like, probably not. She was like, oh, can I get it back? Yes. Oh dear. So yeah, you know what I mean? It's just because she had absolutely no one around her at that point because of lockdowns. You know, everything has stopped, and we hadn't really got ourselves. You know, give it another 6 months and we were all had a much more an online presence, and we're starting to, you know, do Facebook lives and, you know, Instagram lives and post, you know, all this sort of stuff, and Q&As and everything like that suddenly kicked off in lockdown because no one had any other support. That's why. So, you know, once we all started to do that, I think it was a bit better again, but it's but yeah, she just had a baby at totally the wrong time. Bless her. But yeah, it was really hard for mums.
I know, it's so funny what you say about that kind of like 15% of babies that will just go with the routines, and that sleep training might be a few minutes of fussing and they're done. And sometimes I think if I'd not had a really sensitive, refluxy, like tongue-tied baby, would I be a sleep trainer now? Maybe. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, exactly.
Like, it's interesting, isn't it? Like how and so tell me about your orchid, because to have an orchid at number 4,
that was a bit, yeah. I mean, I said I had a slight orchid tendency with her, with twin one.
Yeah.
Little bit. I had realised that there was a difference between different personality types and things like that as well. So he was probably really shouldn't have been a twin. But yeah, he was because he was a twin, though, he also did get a lot of support from his brother, and I think that helped a lot, you know, as well. So there was that kind of thing going on. So that did make it slightly easier. Is that the word? I don't know, probably not, but you know what I mean. So it wasn't. So, but yes, number 4 was an interesting one, because he is, I mean, still now it's better than it was, but when he does go through a development, we're just in the middle of a slightly interesting time at the moment with him. Last 6 months ago, he was just a breeze, totally easy.
Yeah.
And now we're going back to toddler tantrums again at the moment. Anyway, so I just put a post on Facebook about it, and I know quite a few people with similar age babies on Facebook, because we were all in a group together due in April 2014 or whatever it was. Yeah. And a lot of the people I'm still in contact with on Facebook, and they went, "Oh my God, mine's doing this as well." So it's obviously a developmental thing.
Yeah. It's always good to know it's normal though, isn't it?
It always is. Yes, it is good. But yeah, he was very, very hard work. Literally, I mean, from the minute he was born, I don't think I really could put him down really for the first 6 months, but he was so determined to do everything as well that he actually, I've got a video of him. He learned to crawl at 6 months and 2 days, and he was walking at 9.5 months. And it was just like, he was just one of those who wanted to not be a baby. Was basically, he didn't really enjoy being a baby. I don't think. He was very hard to settle. He had, proper, I mean, all my kids were a bit unsettled in the evenings, and, a bit, colicky, as if you call it that. I'm not sure about colic. I think it's I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, colic is undiagnosed crying, isn't it?
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of babies are unsettled in the evening, but he really did take it to the extreme. I was out in the sling with him every single night, walking around the block about 10 o'clock. That was the only thing. Wouldn't have daddy, wouldn't have anything. Feds had total nursing strike at 3 months in the daytime. He's just like, what's this about? He'd never had a bottle his entire life. And I was just like, what? It was just total, just like, oh my God. So yeah, and wouldn't settle on the breast. I had a very massive oversupply, which didn't help. So he would literally feed for 2 minutes, be done, but of course then wouldn't be asleep. So I had to find other ways for him to sleep. So lived in the sling totally. Wouldn't go in the buggy, wouldn't go in the car seat. Wouldn't, just like, so sort of gave up traveling by car. Really, just went on the bus everywhere with him in the sling because it was easier. So yeah, it was really, really, really difficult. So, and nothing that I'd done with my other kids worked, and that was what the hardest thing was. So yeah, really, really hard. He was also a complete nightmare toddler. So, he was a runner, so he'd let go of his hand and it was whoosh, gone. You know what I mean? Bam. Absolutely.
I've got one of them. It's intense.
They do grow out of it. Even those ones that they do, honestly. You'll be okay soon. Give it another year.
I think I can see the light at the end of the tunnel. I think we've kind of come out of it, but for about 2 years, and again, I had an early walker, and I just felt like the second he put one foot in front of the other, he just never stopped running. Like he literally could run before he could walk. Like,
yeah, exactly.
If there's ever an open gate in the playground, he's on.
Find it. I used to go round and actually close all the gates. The first thing that I did when we walked in.
Yeah, me too.
But yeah, so then they managed to learn how to open doors, which is a really bad idea. Oh my God, when they can learn to open doors, that's terrible when that happens. But yeah, thankfully he never went out the front door. That was always my main concern, actually, that he would go out the front door, because my friend's little girl went to the shop on her own when she was about 3.
Oh my goodness.
And so found her halfway down the street. So, but yeah, he never did that one. I was so thankful of that. So, but yeah, that was one of the few. Yeah, it was just really, really hard. He didn't really sleep, at all. Particularly, I went back to work quite early with him. I had to with him and my 2 single ones. I had to go because self-employed. I'm a music teacher as well. That's my other job. So self-employed music teacher. So I don't really get very good maternity leave, and so that was. But I remember taking him to the childminder. And the comment when I picked him up was like, "Oh my God, he doesn't sleep, does he?" And I was like, "See, I told you." So I'd warned her before. So, very low sleep needs child generally. He was fine on 10 hours and no nap at the age of 4. Absolutely fine on that. Whereas his twin brothers, when they first started school, they were real proper 12 to 13 hour kids. Do you know what I mean? They needed a really, really big stretch sleep over. So that was a bit of a learning curve. So he would often be up 9 o'clock, 10 sometimes, and still be fine for school the next day. And it was, just really, really intense, I think, was the main thing. So struggled slightly with him. It has put me off having any more. I think that's probably why I got given him as number 4. So I didn't have any more children.
Yeah, that's not going to do it.
But he has sort of bloomed into a very, very self-confident child, you know what I mean? And he walked in school, no problems whatsoever. Didn't, look back particularly. He was a little bit worried about it beforehand, but once he got there, and he was absolutely fine. So I think if it's this kind of orchid, when I first read the kind of terminology in orchid, I just thought, you know what, actually that sums him up totally, because he needed so much nurturing in those early days. One of the proudest things that I've done in my life is managed to nurture him, not actually, throw him out the window, which was quite tempting sometimes. So, but managed to nurture him as best I could with three children. But managed to cope with that and managed to survive. And actually, then once he got over his really intense big feelings and as toddlers, massive dance, a whole lot, quite extreme from that point of view. But once we kind of got over that, he was actually an absolute delight, and just like, and he's so creative and so just like he's done. I've always said from the moment he was, from the toddler years, really, he's either going to change the world or he's going to go to prison. So my job is to stop it being the second one. If I can stop it being that one, because I caught him shoplifting 2 days ago. Come on. I mean, he's 8. He knows that he's not supposed to do this. So, he'd put a lolly in his pocket in Londres.
What a rebel.
Purpose. Try and take it so he'd get a second one. Yeah. You know what I mean? I was just like, you can't do that. But, he used to do that sort of stuff all the time, and you can't. Whereas the others had a bit of a moral compass. And as soon as I explained why, all kids take sweets, you know what I mean? That's what they do. But, you can usually stop it and nip it in the bud quite early, you know what I mean? But with him, it didn't work at all. He's just got no self-control, impulse factor, 100%, so can't stop himself doing stuff. So yeah, it's very, very interesting. I think he'll probably go quite a long way if I can stop him going to jail. So that's my main job as a parent.
So I was interested because you mentioned that the twins had each other.
Yep.
Did they sleep in this, did they co-bed or co-sleep with you, or what was your sleep setup?
It would have been different if I'd done it now, actually. But to start with, they did share. I used Moses baskets to begin with because I thought that's what you were supposed to do, which sort of worked. But but actually they went into a big cot and shared from about probably a month in, maybe 6 weeks, something like that. And actually, I think that really helped them regulate their wake ups. Actually, there's a bit of research on the basis online, Durham University, which the Twins Trust funded, about twins co-bedding and sharing their sleep space, and that actually does regulate their sleep cycles, just like it. The research that shows when you bed share that you regulate with your baby as well. So same kind of thing. So that did help a little bit, and then they started hitting each other. So I then separated them, but had them right next to each other. Yeah. But if I was going to do it again, I would have made a big co-sleeper cot out of a standard cot. So this is what I always suggest to twin parents to make life a lot easier, because I did it with my singletons and it was so much easier. And that's to take the side off a cot and push it right up to bed.
Yeah.
Butt your mattresses up together, make sure they're same level, stuff any gaps and all that kind of stuff, and just have them there next to you so that you can just get to them much more easily and settle them much more easily as well. And I think I would have done that with the twins if I ever read anything about it, because it makes total sense. So, but no one did that back in 2005.
Yeah, of course. And so there'd be one full-size cot.
Yes, because you can fit 2 babies in, and quite often if you sleep them horizontally, so their feet are on your mattress, then you can honestly keep that set up for well into even into the toddler years if you want to. You know what I mean? But yeah, then a big advocate for floor beds. I discovered the floor bed with the twins by accident, because we were staying at my sister-in-law's house, and they didn't have sort of beds exactly. They were just about over the age where they were going into toddler beds, but they didn't have any. So they had a kind of fold out sort of floor mattressy sort of sofa-y type thing, which just like one of the cheap sort of IKEA jobs, I think it was, one of those, what I mean, where it just turned into a kind of floor bed when you unrolled it. And so they slept on there to begin with, and then I just got up and slept with them and sort of settled them, because they were, when they're in that getting up at 5 a.m. mode, that bit, So got into bed with them at about 4 a.m. and stayed there, and they went back to sleep again. And I was like, oh, okay. So then we tried to replicate that a little bit at home, which helped massively. So I'm now a big advocate for floor beds for twins as well, because I think that would have made my life a lot easier too if I had actually done that, looking back. So even though they were quite good sleepers, you still had those periods, that period of time. I think it was around 18 months where they were really up at 5 a.m. every day if I didn't cuddle them back to sleep again. So that did make quite a big difference, I think. So yeah, that's how I would do it now if I were to do it again, which I'm not.
But with your orchid, was he a co-sleeper? Was that?
Absolutely. He'd never even set foot in a cot.
Yeah.
Literally, if I tried to lower him, and he'd just scream immediately. So just like he wouldn't have it at all. I mean, I did have the cot on the side of the bed, but that was really just to make sure he didn't roll off. He didn't ever sleep in it, but it stopped him rolling off the bed. That's basically, because if he did roll, he went into the cot, which was fine. So, but yeah, he was not having any of it whatsoever. So I completely got rid of that idea.
Yeah, I suppose the problem with the challenge with co-sleeping and twins, isn't it, is that many are born preterm, low birth weight, etc. And so I think that's
that's where the side cot
works.
thing works really well, because you've got that separate sleep space that you can use without technically bed sharing. And there's no research as to when it is safe to, and they can't research it, this is the problem. There's no research as to when it's safe to start bed sharing with a premature baby.
There
just isn't any, but I mean, what I normally suggest to parents is they have to use their intuition as to whether they think it's safe or not. And that's basically, so go over your other risk factors, anything else, if the baby's healthy, if they're feeding well, if they're alert and waking themselves for feeds, if they're behaving like a normal baby is at their adjusted age, you know what I mean? So whatever that is, if they're sort of 2 months adjusted or whatever, and they're waking themselves, and they haven't got any underlying health conditions, especially around breathing and such, like, is always the biggest risk factor for anything like that around sleep. Then falling asleep in your bed with your baby is going to be less risky than doing it on a sofa or an armchair. So that's the basically you have to balance the risks, don't you, at the end of the day. So I can't say it's safe, because there's no research to say it's safe, so I can't say it's safe. But if you think about all the different, do a bit of research yourself, think about all the different risk factors and all this sort of stuff, and make an informed choice as to when you think that your babies will be okay. So that's all you can do. So but yeah, many twin parents end up bed sharing eventually. It's usually in the later months, actually, I find. Often,
after the initial adrenaline of having a newborn wears off, and you're really
I know, I'm really tired. Yes.
Really tired. Oh gosh, thank you so much, Kathryn. I feel like there's been such a lovely mix in this of like really good practical advice, but also just like hearing your own stories, and like obviously you've had an amazing attitude and mindset to the whole thing, and laughing about it, I think, is probably a big part of. Do you think?
If you don't laugh, you cry. So that's what. But I've always been one of those people that's been really honest about what's happening with my kids. So I think that really helps, and it seems to help a lot of other people as well. I'd always try and when you're in your little sort of group of mums, like your NCT group or something like that, and it's all a bit like, my baby's doing this and my baby's doing that. I was always like, oh, mine isn't. You know what I mean? And then you get 2 or 3 people going, oh no, actually mine isn't either, and it just gave them permission to actually be quite honest about how they were finding it and stuff like that. I've always find it saying it's quite hard, and finding it difficult. So I think that's one of the best things, is trying to be real as much as possible, because actually it helps other people as well as yourself. So, and you find other people going through the same thing if you do that as well. I think that it really does, and you're right. And I think, God, we could talk a lot, couldn't we, about why some people aren't honest, and why some or feel like they can't be, but having a laugh about it, but also being like, this is really, really difficult, it's that balance, isn't it? And it does help other people feel a lot less alone. So thank you so much for like giving up your time and talking to us. It's fun.
And so if people want to learn more about you, I'll link to your website in the show notes. But is there anything you've got coming up that you wanted to mention, or?
I don't know. I'm just around quite a bit. I do Q&As and stuff like that. So if you've got anything, if you're an expectant twin parent, come join our Facebook group because it's amazing. I do antenatal sessions on there every couple of months as well. So if you're wanting to learn about sort of preparing to breastfeed and knowing what you're in for, basically, that's a good one to come to. So we're a charity, so they funded me to do that, which is lovely. And we have lots of support on there for any twin parents who are wanting to breastfeed or breastfeeding already or whatever. I don't know. I'm just a kind of I like to be present on Instagram, I suppose. It's probably the best way. So I try and do a Q&A every fortnight and things like that. So and, the answer is normally yes, it is normal.
Yeah.
When you do a Q&A, isn't it?
Yeah, and it won't last forever.
Yeah. So we're doing a Q&A actually live, me and Miriam, who's my lactation consultant colleague that we do a lot of our workshops. So I did quite a few workshops, online Zoom workshops, stuff like that. So we're doing a little live Q&A on Instagram soon. So we'll do one of those every so often and things like that. It's fun trying to spread the word.
Yeah, thank you for all the work you do on Instagram. You are definitely a force for good and good information, and but thank you so much.
Oh, how amazing is Kathryn Stagg? Oh my God, I loved that. And it really left me with such a big smile on my face afterwards because she's so knowledgeable and she's so funny and reassuring. And I was thinking how different I think my whole experience of early motherhood would have been if I'd had 15 minutes with Kathryn Stagg. And I was also reflecting on how important support really, really is. And that doesn't always mean paying for it, although, that can be an option as well. But sometimes it is that amazing midwife or health visitor or the other parent you meet in the park and they say something to you that just makes you feel like you're doing a good job, you're not messing this up, and that this too shall pass if you are in a hard time. I think those experiences are so, so important. And I hope that today's episode helped you feel like that. You're really not a failure if your baby needs you a lot right now, or if you're feeling overwhelmed or like you don't know what to do next. You've got this. It's okay. It's hard. But just because you're finding it hard, it doesn't mean you're doing it wrong.